ever enjoyed our time together thus far. Thanks for your patience in that first session that I did. It was very dense, and you were very patient. This one's going to be a bit more spacious, I hope, a bit more room for conversation. And didn't Craig give an awesome presentation? Isn't that good to know that belief in the deity of Christ, that he was fully man and fully God, is not something that came about at the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, but something that can be evidenced to have existed very early on. And he didn't even go into the evidence from the New Testament itself, portions of which you can argue came very, very early after the life of Jesus. So that's such good stuff. Today we're going to ask, another big important question. How do we share the gospel in a post-truth world? And we want to ask the questions, are we living in a post-truth world today? A world that's lost hope in knowing some kind of ultimate truth. Is that the culture that we live in? Do the people that you meet and converse with, do they think that? We're going to ask those kinds of questions. So we'll do this in 3 ways. First, we'll ask if our society is quote-unquote post-truth, and if so, ask what that might mean. We'll look at how we might respond to 3 aspects that I think are a part of the ethos of our Western cultures and societies today. And finally, we'll look at some objections to our truth claims about Jesus' uniqueness, okay, or his own claims to uniqueness, we should say. So let's take these in turn. Now, what do we mean by post-truth? Did you know that this word was Oxford Dictionary's 2016 Word of the Year? So every year, the Oxford Dictionary says, here's the word of the year. Here's a word that became very prominent this year and kind of characterizes what we saw in our Western society this year. And they chose as 2016 the word post-truth. Now, can anyone guess why they might have done that, or what reasons they might have done that? It was so widely used? Yeah, that's right. And what would have happened in 2016 in the leading up to that would have led to post-truth being spoken about more and more? Anything that kind of happened in the world that... Yes. We had Brexit, and we had the lead up to the presidential election where Donald Trump was elected as president. And do you know that this word increased 2,000 times in usage, and they often use kind of Google Analytics to see people searching for the word and the use of the word in discourse online and so on to kind of figure out, and they noticed a huge spike in the use of this word coming to the end of 2016. As was said, because of Brexit and because of the American presidential election, big political events. In both of them, it seemed that truth was kind of a secondary issue. Do you remember some of the bus campaigns for Brexit where they put big stats up on the cost of the NHS, for example, or something like that? And if you really pushed on the data that was given, you found out that it wasn't actually substantiated. Or some of the things that President Trump said in the run-up to the election, like, no one respects women more than I do, for example. Right? It was one of the things that he said. And meanwhile, we're listening to audio tape of him bragging about physically assaulting women, or at least commending it. And yet he just stood up and said, well, no one respects women more than me. And this is what kind of led to this post-truth language. So what does it say in the Oxford Dictionary when you turn to post-truth? Well, it says, relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion or personal belief. So less trust in trying to get at objective facts and weighing the claims of people in light of them, and more appeal to how someone can persuade you by their persona, by their charisma, by appealing to what you're feeling, what your emotions are, and getting you to follow them on that basis rather than by trying to win you by virtue of arguments about truth, what's true and what's false. Okay? So in this book, Post-Truth by Matthew Dacona, He cites a study that was done in 2010 by a man by the name of David Roberts. And what David did is he examined how people made their political decisions. He did a vast survey and tried to figure out what were the factors that played into people voting the way that they did. And this is the chilling thing that he discovered, okay? So just read this with me. And this is Dacona citing David. Comforting as it was to imagine that voters gathered facts, drew conclusions from those facts, formed issue positions based on their conclusions, and then chose a political party accordingly, instead, electoral behavior did not conform to this ideal. In practice, what people did instead is that they chose a party on the basis of value affiliations, adopted the opinions of the tribe, and then developed arguments to support those opinions, and only then selected facts which reinforced their contentions. So we live in a post-truth politics, a political culture in which politics, public opinion, and media narratives have become almost entirely disconnected from policy, i.e. the substance of legislation. This obviously dims any hope of reasoned legislative compromise. Is this the world that you live in? What do you think? Is this an accurate assessment of our current political landscape? What's happening? What are your thoughts? Do you think our Western cultures are in a post-truth era? I want you to tell me what you think. And one way you could do that is you could ask, well, what evidence would you appeal to in support of or against the conclusion that we're living in a post-truth era, at least in our Western societies? What do you think? Do you think this is true? Tell me what your thoughts are and what evidence you would point to make an... Please, yeah.
What's the difference between post-truth and relative truth? What's true for me is true for me, what's true for you is not true for you. What's the connection between relative truth and post-truth?
So the question is, what's the connection between relativism and this post-truth language? And I think that you're right, they're very closely connected with one another. But what the post-truth observation is that the issue of relativism is being thrust into the center of the public square, so to speak. So we're seeing relativism manifest itself in public dialogue in a very forceful and chilling way. Not to say that that's never happened before in the history of human politics, but in terms of our Western democracies, it seems that this post-truth dynamic is showing up in our, so relativism showing up in our public's square.
Okay, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
My thinking is that because it was connected relative truth, you see the moral decline, that it's okay to do things, but not how far to take that. For example, versus the same day, many of the things that we as Christians say is against the truth.
Okay. Right.
It's acceptable now. And I don't know if that lines up with as an evidence of reality.
Okay, so what do you think? So he's noting that there's been a progression or a regression, however you want to say it, in terms of moral values in our Western societies. And you're asking the question, does that evidence that we're living in a post-truth era or not? Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question.
I think the transgender debate, it's an example of the whole post-truth thing, simply because a lot of the arguments seem to be based on who can check like this, and who
Okay.
can demonize the opposition the most.
Right.
A lot of the opinion seems to be formed based on emotion, and if you try and meet it with an intellectual argument, you shout at them, name calling, and
Okay, so Craig referenced the debate about gender issues, and that the debate itself is not so much, you're not so much talking about the arguments within the debate, but the fact that it seems to be characterized by this polarization, rather than a listening to and a reasoned asking about arguments and facts, more of a demonizing of the other. We're in our tribe, we know what's right, you are oppressive and intolerant, we're not listening to you, get out. Right. Yeah, so that would be an evidence. If to the degree that's true, I think that would be evidence of post-truth culture. Yes, in the back.
I agree with that point.
Right. So there's been a shift there towards the internal and towards the emotive and to in reality, very strong desires that someone might have and a very difficult process. Yeah. Anything else? Any other evidence? What do you think? Well, is this a new thing? Let's read in the Gospel of John. And you'll know this passage, I imagine. John chapter 18. This is Jesus' discussion with Pontius Pilate. And I'm going to read beginning at verse 33. John chapter 18, beginning at verse 33. Notice what's said about truth in this discussion. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" And Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Pilate asked Jesus. And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is on the side of truth listens to me." And Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And after he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover." And it was Passover at that time. "So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." And Barabbas was a robber. And so Pilate, confronted with this incredible man, Jesus, and his claims of being from a king from another world, he reacts to Jesus' claims to truth with just throwing up his hands and saying, "Well, what is truth?" This kind of despairing, you might say, relativism about truth, a kind of cynicism about truth. Now, Pilate at the time, living in that part of the world, of course, it was full of different sects of Judaism, different pagan beliefs. There were all sorts of different beliefs in his world that would have been, people would have vied for space over. And he kind of looks at it all, and he's invested in political pressures that are beyond him, and he in the end just throws up his hands and says, "Well, what is truth?" And what's the implication of Pilate's doing that with Jesus? He looks for an politically expedient way of resolving it. Here's this man Barabbas. Here's this man Jesus. Can I release him? And they say, "No, give us Barabbas." And in the end, the throwing up of his own hands and saying, "Well, what is truth?" leads him to handing over the truth to be crucified. So a chilling account of one man who, according to John's testimony, believed what a number of people believe today, that ultimate truth is not something that we can have hold of as human beings. So three aspects of this post-truth ethos that I just want to briefly look at. And we've raised the question of relativism already, but I want to throw into the mix this thing called scientism. It's actually a very easy thing to understand, and I think it's very, very important that we understand scientism today, and tribalism. And I contend that these three things kind of mix together to give us our post-truth ethos in which we share the gospel today. So what is relativism? Well, you said it. It's the belief that your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever been talking about religion or your personal belief in Christ, and someone's responded to you in this way? They might not necessarily put you down for your beliefs, but they'll kind of put you in a certain box, won't they? That's great for you. Have you heard that? That's what's really good for you. I'm really glad that you're a believer, but for me, I don't think that way. and it's almost an acceptance that people can hold vastly different and conflicting views, and just as long as they're kept private and kept in their own personal spheres, that's fine. But don't try and claim that this religious belief that you have has some kind of hook or bearing on the nature of ultimate reality. Okay? So that's what relativism would look like with respect to religion. But ultimately, it's the belief. So one article that I read in college was called, "There's no such thing as objective truth, and it's a good thing too." There's no such thing as objective truth, and it's a good thing too. And that's the relativistic mindset. It's rightly sensitive to the fact that there's a vast kind of sweep of different kinds of beliefs in the world. There are a vast number of different kinds of cultures which give rise to various belief systems, and it's very sensitive to that, and it cares about that, and rightly so that it does. But then it takes kind of another step and says, therefore we shouldn't try and commend ultimate visions of the world to one another as being as telling the great big story of the world. That's going a step too far, they would say. So do you think that people are by and large relativistic in contemporary Western societies? What do you think? Would you say yes? Who would kind of say yes? Do you think so? And would anybody really object and think, would disagree with that? You're welcome to. I'd love it if you did. Does anyone really disagree or want to object? No? I hope somebody does sometime. Okay, so that's just a really quick look at relativism. Now, what is scientism? Well, who here doesn't want to benefit from the vast discoveries we've had in science in recent centuries? My goodness. My son got very ill, about a year ago, and we took him to the JR Hospital in Oxford, and I was absolutely blown away at the care that my son got. They even brought him a tablet, and he could play on the tablet while he was being examined. The doctor was so thorough and knowledgeable. He had 3 or 4 scans and blood tests within the scope of a half an hour. Do any of us want to decry or not give thanks to God for the scientific advances that we've enjoyed? So that's when we use an ism is usually a nasty ism. It's usually not a compliment to say that this particular idea is an ism. Okay. So when I talk about scientism, I'm not talking about the very positive things that science has given us. I love science. I wish I was more of a scientist and knew more about science myself. I'm trying to learn. So if that's not what scientism is, if it's not just a general disparagement of science, that would be foolish. Then what is it? Well, it kind of gets at this question. This is a key question that gets up to the heart of what scientism is. Is all that can be known by humans open to being known by the scientific method? What do you think? Is all that can be known by we humans open to being known by the scientific method? What do you think? The scientific method, of course, is examining some phenomena, physical phenomena, forming a hypothesis, coming up with a way of testing that hypothesis to see whether it could prove true or is falsified. If it's proved true in certain experiments, then sending the results of that experiments wide out into the scientific field so that it can be tested by other labs and other scientists. And over time, there's a consensus that's built up in the scientific community about a certain law of nature or a certain way of understanding phenomena in our world. And that's kind of a very harsh summary of the scientific method. Many of you will be able to describe it much better than I can. But do you think that all that we can know as human beings can be known by virtue of the scientific method? What do you think? You're shaking your head no. Why do you think? Okay, so if there is a God, then he might be able to disclose himself through the prophecies of human beings whom he's given some kind of special encounter with him about. Okay, very good. Other thoughts? Yes.
Also, ethics and morality.
Okay.
Because you can do something that you should.
Okay.
And so, just because we can hold things doesn't mean that we should hold things. Just because you can change someone's physical gender by having an operation doesn't mean that you should. And so I think there are more abstract things
Okay.
Which can't be measured.
Okay. So what if the scientist was to push back and say, well, what if we were to come up with a scientific way? And some scientists will make this argument. They'll say, yeah, you're right. We might not be able to kind of get at legislative kind of morality issues by virtue of science, but they might say it's only a matter of time. I mean, if we keep examining the nature of humanity and examining societies scientifically, we'll eventually come to a scientific conclusion about the best way of living as human beings in communion with each other. They might respond that way. So what then would we say? Did you have a point? Yeah?
Your question suggested that the gender could be changed by an operation, but actually gender genetically is never changed.
Okay.
It's still an XY chromosome for a male, so it's still male even if it's done an operation.
Okay, so at the DNA level you're saying, right.
I think a lot of it is caught up in the question, all of that can be known by humans. That's a big scope, right?
Mm.
Humans can know God if they have a heart to. Right? But how do you know God by scientific means? And for example, creation, as in science, as you said, it has to be observable, repeatable. Creation happened once.
Right.
It's never going to be repeated. It's never going to be observed again. There were no eyewitnesses there. But we can know by it from outlanders who live God. So
Okay.
that can be known by humans, but not the scientific. Other things will be abstract ones. How can science prove what makes me love?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, this... Okay, yeah, we're getting on some big issues. Yes, yeah?
If science could prove the ability to be able to choose yourself and make choices yourself, then I would say yes, and the scientific method. If we can't, then the answer is no. I have the freedom to choose whether I believe or accept something. If science can prove that, then the answer would be yes, if not no.
Okay, so if you're saying that if science had the ability to reach right down to the deepest parts and expose the deepest parts of our volition and our choices,
You have to be able to prove scientifically that
the reasons why you choose what you do.
choose to do what I choose to do
Okay,
because of my gender.
okay,
That's deep.
right, okay. These are very big questions that you can see, but they're massively important, and the assumptions of scientism are so pervasive. I encounter it when I'm chatting on university campuses with just friends that I have, and it's a sweeping assumption. Another way to put it is this way. So, of course, we love science. I believe that a Christian, because they believe that God created the world and also created us in his own image, that we can expect that there's like a link or a tie-in between our minds and the logic of the created order. And so that sends Christians to engage creation and learn and to be hopefully among the best scientists, right? Because we believe we're learning more about God when we learn more about his world. But what about this ism? Scientism is when knowing and what counts as knowledge gets reduced to the deliverances of the scientific method. Science, in other words, as the exclusive arbiter of known reality. And I think today in our modern world where it's faced with such a range of plurality and options, that science has become kind of a haven. Well, at least we know within science that then we're on firm ground, right? And so there's this propensity to then shut off other avenues of knowing that aren't based on the scientific method, but that have been a part of our Western tradition of thought for millennia. So it's an incredibly influential view today. So when we talk about the post-truth world that we live in, I don't know, I've got mixed feelings, I have to be honest, because on the one hand, our cultures are, I think, post-truth, especially with respect to politics and with respect to religious and spiritual concerns. But in other areas, people are quite confident that we can know what the truth is, don't you think? I think a lot of people in our culture really believe that science is helping us get to kind of a bedrock truth, right? And so in that sense, it's not post-truth. It's a bit confusing like that. So it's important to understand the difference between what you would call global and local skepticism, or you might say global and local relativism. And what do I mean by that? Well, a global skeptic would be skeptical about truth in any and every sphere. The political, the religious, the philosophical, even maybe with respect to whether science is helping us get at reality at all. That's a radical global skepticism, global in the sense of enveloping all human discourse and knowledge. But a local skeptic is someone who is skeptic about just a certain area of human discourse. So I don't think we often encounter global skeptics. It's a hard position to hold. But I do think that people are quite skeptical in certain pockets. We're becoming increasingly skeptical that our political leaders are telling us the truth, for example. I think people are quite skeptical that religions aren't just about power and about trying to get things from people. I think people are quite skeptical about religious claims today. But I don't think that they're very skeptical about scientific claims, for example, right? So it's really important as we talk about post-truth that we're not too sweeping in our understanding of that. And the third and final phenomenon I wanted to talk about is that of tribalism. And what do I mean by that? Well, tribalism is the phenomena of closing ranks into various tribes in response to the staggering plurality of our world. And so it's a kind of a turning your back to the other, people who don't think, like you mentioned, Craig, and closing in with others who are like-minded. And there's a predisposition to uncritically trust those leading the tribe and representing the tribe on the inside, and distrusting those who are saying other things on the outside. Now, do you see this happening more and more? Nationalism is kind of a big-scale version of tribalism. Nationalism not being mere patriotism, or as you saw my Canadian toques in the picture in the first, Canadians are very, very... I never see a British person wearing like a British hat or anything like that. But we Canadians, we'll bear the flag wherever. We're very patriotic people, right? But hopefully we're not nationalistic. What's the difference? Well, nationalism is a kind of tribalism where, with respect to nations, where nations come to believe that there is a superior nation to other nations, and other nations are inferior, kind of a city on a hill understanding of one's nation, and that can lead to very dreadful things and kind of closing oneself off from other difference. But this can happen. Man, this can happen not just on the national level, but it can happen on the communal level. Well, I'm not sure how it is in your city or in Cardiff, but do people kind of gather together in like-minded tribes and start to exalt their own vision of things and put down others? Whenever that happens, that's tribalism. And this I think is happening increasingly, especially in North America. Do you see the phenomena of tribalism in our societies today? What do you think? Did someone nod? Did you nod? Yes. Yeah.
I think going back to Brexit, the leaders in the reminders very much so, especially if you look on the internet and comment sections and things, it gets very tribal.
Right.
And I think there's a risk of us inside the church to have that.
Yes.
Different denominations.
Isn't this the truth? Yeah. My goodness, I'm glad that you said that. And I'm glad you raised the point about the internet as well. And there is something about social media that does kind of encourage a kind of tribalism, I think. Because I have my friends, who I've identified as friends, and they're liking certain things. My friends are liking certain, and because they're liking certain things, then it pops up on my feed. And then I put my post out and they like it. And it's kind of like a, we'll all pat each other on the shoulder society, right? And that can lead almost without decision, without intentionality, to a kind of tribal effect where we close rank with one another and aren't actually trying to listen to or hear those who have differences with us. Instead, we just can demonize them. And my goodness. So can this happen in Christian churches? Yeah, and we really, really want to avoid this. My goodness. Do we ever want to avoid, so if we're going to, for example, talk about the new atheists, for example, as a part of future apologetics conferences or whatever, it would be very easy to kind of demonize the new atheists, right? And go on about Daniel Dennett and so on, and what a fool, and we never want to be characterized by that. We don't want to be tribal, but unfortunately the history of the Christian church, you'll see lots of instances, I think, where Christianity has kind of closed itself off, both from other religions and refused to kind of listen or genuinely hear them, but also to other branches of Christianity, and not been able to learn from them or listen to them. So this is part of our phenomena in our post-truth world. We've spoken about relativism, scientism, and now tribalism. And I think these three combine. So we've asked if our society is post-truth, and if so, asked what that means. So now we can look at how we might respond to these different aspects, relativism, scientism, and tribalism. But first, is there any questions before we go on at all? Anyone want to raise an objection? I'm still waiting for one.
But in fact, by saying that, it's good not to know because there's no such thing as absolute truth, except the fact there's no such thing as absolute truth.
So your point is that if we say there's no such thing as objective truth, the implication is that we're saying that as kind of an objective, we mean that universally, and therefore we're kind of refuting ourselves. Yeah, don't steal my thunder, okay? Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Are there any other questions at all? Yes, please. Go on.
In that the church of it is so broad. I was chatting to somebody earlier about this. The charismatic has become charismatic, on one hand, and you've got this liberal views over on the other side. We don't believe the same things, and so in trying to communicate to one another, our own relativism comes into play, doesn't it? Because we believe that this is my understanding of what the Word says, this is my understanding of Christianity, and once we all want unity, sometimes we see something and think, well, I can't run with that, and I can't unite with that, and I can't leave my church, my pastoring into that. And so I think there is something of an inevitability of us trying to protect where we are and those around us.
So I'm not saying that tribalism, I think it's okay to have identity and to have difference, but the issue comes when one closes one's ears, and that's where we begin to drift into tribalism. So it'd be one thing to acknowledge that I'm a Baptist, but I happen to be worshiping at an Anglican church in Oxford, but there's a Presbyterian church down the road. It'd be one thing to acknowledge all that and say, yeah, we've got some tough, interesting differences. That's difference, right? But tribalism is a step further, where we close our ears and say, not only are we right and they're wrong, but we're right and their view isn't worth being heard. Where you begin to morally, and you see this, just case in point, look at American politics in the last week, and you see this dynamic playing out, where it's not an open discussion about ideas, but a closing ranks within parties, and appealing to one's own base, and a refusal to listen to counter evidence that might challenge the beliefs within the tribe. Yeah. That's where it goes from a celebration of difference and an open dialogue and debate to where it becomes tribal. I think that's an important distinction.
I think just with the tribalism, a tribe is a safe place, and there's a bit of a comfort zone, plus the safety is very scary sometimes. You step outside.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the tribe forms in the first place, I would say.
Yes, so that's your point, is that there is something in our human nature where we want to, it's dizzying to be confronted with too much difference, and so there is a certain comfort found in uniformity, right? And so it's natural that we drift towards that. Yeah. Yes?
I think the end of the day, the tribalism shows
Hmm. Right. So there's an element of fear to the tribalistic impulse, fear of the other, fear of the different. Yeah, I think that's an insightful point. Right. If we let the other viewpoint in, it might do damage. Yeah. So let's just look briefly at how Jesus might relate to these three things. So you'll remember in the passage in John 14, verses 1 through 7, that Jesus is speaking with Thomas. And Thomas asks, "Where are you going, Lord? Please show us the way." And in response, Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 6, "I am the way and the truth and the life." And then he says something quite staggering. He says, "No one comes to the Father except through me." So Jesus makes very exclusive claims. I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. So that's quite an exclusive claim. So Jesus asserts himself as the truth, as the way to the Father, to the degree that we can trust John's testimony to Jesus' words. Jesus made very exclusive claims about himself. He claimed to be God in human form. And as you know, in our post-truth culture, to the degree that's true, it sits very uncomfortable on our shoulders, doesn't it, to hear those words from Jesus and to try and commend Jesus' teaching to a world that doesn't want to hear such exclusive, such authoritative words from somebody. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. How the culture might think about it by and large. Of course, it's always a danger to talk about culture in a big sweeping way, but one way they might view it is the example of the elephant. Have you heard this example about the various religions? So one person might say, with respect to all the variety of religions that we see in spiritualities, well, it's kind of like there's this elephant, a big elephant, and there are a few different people surrounding it, but they have blindfolds on. Have you heard this? And one person grabs the tail and says, I know this thing, whatever it is, it's kind of like snake-like. It's thin and it moves easily and it kind of whips around, right? And the other person with the blindfold on grabs the trunk of the elephant and says, this thing, whatever it is, it's big and it's kind of a bit slimy and it's got rough skin, right? Another person grabs the ear with the blindfold on and says, no, it's big and flappy and it's kind of hairy inside. Right? Another person kind of grabs the underbelly and they're like, this thing, it's not small and flappy, it's massive and firm. They've got the blindfold on. And the person standing back from the perspective that sees them all recognizes that, no, you've just all got a piece of the elephant, right? And so Jesus making his claim, I am the way and the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father but through me. No, what you've got there is you've got kind of the trunk. You've got the trunk of the elephant. You're not seeing the whole. And what would you say in response to this argument? In a matter of fact, the case is that the various religions of the world simply have different pieces of the puzzle. And they're all claiming to be exclusive. They're all claiming to see the big picture, but in fact, they've only just got a little piece of the puzzle. Okay? And it really would be quite arrogant of someone just holding the tail to say that they see the whole picture. Do you see the force of that metaphor? It's quite powerful, isn't it? The claim that the various religions of the world kind of only have a piece, and it would be arrogant for them to assert their claims as being ultimate, right? How would you respond to the illustration of the elephant? Do you have any ideas as to what you might say as a Christian person who wants to believe that Jesus' claim to be the way, the truth, and the life is in fact true? Not just true for Christian people, but true, universally true, as I do. How might you respond to the claim that it's arrogant to assert that you have a universal perspective on religious matters? Yeah? You want to venture? Right. Okay. So you're saying that as a Christian person related to God, God can reveal to you his perspective in a sense, and you could say, well, in fact, because God sees the whole elephant and God's speaking to me, I can give you this global, universal perspective of the elephant, right? Right. So what about the Jewish person or the Muslim, for example, who is they're monotheistic like we as Christians are? Well, they certainly would say the same thing. And that would just lead the atheistic skeptic who's looking at the elephants and say, see, you just, yes, I know that you think Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, but these other people say this, and these other people say this. So that's very, very good that you said that, because I wanted to point that out. How else might you respond to the elephant? And Craig, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, the whole idea of, I think when people use that illustration is like they're kind of implying that there are different bits of truth and each religion has got a different bit of the truth, but
Right.
religions by definition are exclusive anyway. It's like, well, if Jesus really was the way, the truth, and life, the Son of God, and God incarnate, then by definition all the other religions are false. So it's not arrogant to say if what's true about Jesus is true, then all the others are false. It's just a statement about reality.
Okay.
If we're wrong about Jesus, which obviously we're not, but if we're wrong about Jesus, then our viewpoint will be wrong and somebody else's will be right.
Okay. So you're simply saying that the Christian claims are claims to ultimate reality, and if those claims are true, our claims about Jesus are true, then of course it would have universal implication and be true for everybody. If they're not true, what we think about Jesus isn't true, then of course that's right. Okay. What I'm hoping that you would catch about this telling of the elephant illustration is that notice that it presumes a vantage point, a universal vantage point. Do you see that? So the way that the story is told, a missionary and theologian that was sent from England to India by the name of Leslie Newbigin made this point, and he said, the elephant illustration, the person who is the skeptic saying all the religions are just people with blindfolds holding various parts of the elephant, are themselves assuming a universal vantage point. Do you see that? So they're saying, I see the whole elephant. And actually, in fact, you people are holding the pieces, but I'm the one who has the universal perspective. And it's arrogant for you to assert that you have your universal viewpoint. You're the one blindfolded. Do you see? I'm putting it a bit harshly in tone. But I want you to see that it assumes a universal global outlook, just like everyone holding a piece of the elephant does. We can't excuse ourselves from that kind of desire to make universal claims. Even the atheistic skeptic makes universal claims about all of reality. That's not something unique to Christianity. It's not unique to Judaism. It's not unique to Islam. So that's one way that you can respond to that, is just say, well, you're saying there's no such thing as objective religious truth, a universal truth, but isn't your position a universal position as well? And what are the implications of that? Okay? Whew. So, so that's Jesus and relativism we just looked at, Jesus and scientism. An interesting thing about Jesus and what he thinks of as knowledge. In John 17, verses 1 to 2, he says, and this is eternal life, God, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. So Jesus assumes that knowledge is not merely about factoids, certain bits of data in our head. It includes that. Jesus is very concerned for what we might call propositional truth. Truth claims, truth that can be put in statements, truth about physical worlds and material reality. But Jesus doesn't reduce knowledge to that, and I don't think any of us should. Do you know that in one of the most prominent ways that the Old Testament uses the word for knowing is to refer to physical intimacy between a man and a woman? That he knew her or she knew him. And so the vision of knowledge in the Bible isn't merely about knowing, getting all the data right in our heads. It's a relational knowledge. This is eternal life, to know you, God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. So the nature of knowledge certainly cannot be reduced to what can be delivered to us by the scientific method, but has broad implication. And includes a personal knowledge that can't be reduced to things that can be scrutinized by virtue and I wonder of the scientific method. And I wonder if you find that compelling. Anyways, even if you don't think that's compelling, and you are quite convinced by scientism, that scientism is the only reliable means to what can be known as evidence for human knowledge. The scientific method is the baseline. Let me ask you, has scientism as a theory ever been proved by science? You see what I'm getting at there? So my point is that the claim that all that human beings can reliably know is that which can be proved by the scientific method has not itself been proved by the scientific method, nor could it ever be. So it's a self-refuting position. Okay, and I think it's helpful to love, because this is such a pervasive mindset. I think it's very helpful just to raise that question with people who might really think that and say, well, first of all that you know, do you know it because it's been given to you by science? Would you want to collapse all your knowledge to that narrow sphere? And even if so, isn't that a self-refuting position to hold? And you might want to argue that science itself, in the whole practice of science, is based on certain trusts that can't be itself bolstered by science. Trust in that our senses are encountering reality, for example, more philosophical issues that undergird science, but can't be proved by science. And lastly, Jesus in tribalism. So Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, but no one comes to the Father but through me. Now, does that lead to a tribalistic impulse in Christianity? But I want to contend that we as his followers must resist kind of a despairing cynicism and a tribalism, because Jesus himself didn't live that way. Jesus was criticized for the people he hung out with, right? Jesus he didn't try and close, right? Let's get around each other here. Let's all like-minded. If the Christian message is true, this is about God sending his Son, the divine Son of God, to become fully human, to come and die for the sake of his enemies. This is not a tribalistic impulse at the heart of Christianity. It's God reaching out. I will lay down my life for the other. I will find my enemies. I will die for them. That's the impulse at the heart of Christianity. So yes, we want to have our Christian teachings and our Christian distinctives and our Christian identity, but we don't want to push away those who disagree. Instead, we want to serve them. We want to love them. We want to learn from them and dialogue with them. We should be among the most open and politically engaged, winsome and inviting people on the planet, if the Christian message is true. We should be incarnational, like Jesus was, which means taking on the life and the viewpoint of others to try and love them and serve them, okay? Not demonizing the other. And if the Christian message is true and Jesus is the truth, then all truth is God's truth. And we'll love the truth wherever we can find it. If we can find it in science, we'll love the truth. If we can find it in philosophy and literature, we'll be passionate for the truth, because we'll know that if we dive into that discourse and learn lots about it, it will point us to Jesus, because he is the truth, right? That's the opposite of a tribalistic impulse. Jesus would have us resist that impulse, and I would argue that Jesus himself did resist it. Right? He still made very exclusive claims. He teaches the truth, and he wants us to believe that what he's teaching is the truth. But that's different than trying to suppress the other and the different viewpoint. Okay? Yeah. My goodness, I'm flat out of time. But this is the ground we've covered. And I was going to hear some objections to Jesus' claim to uniqueness, and here I'll just throw them up. Don't all religions teach essentially the same thing? Aren't they all just partial representations of the whole? Aren't all religions historically and culturally located and thus relative? Isn't it arrogant to assert a grasp of ultimate truth? Isn't religion simply a private matter which should be kept out of the public square? And then my conclusion, I was going to persuade you is no. Let's share his gospel far and wide with confidence. But since I'm sorry, Craig, I've overshot my time. But this little book called The Reason for God, you might have heard of it, by Tim Keller, Belief in an Age of Skepticism. And he has an initial chapter that's called There Can't Be Just One True Religion. And those questions that I've just thrown up there, maybe there'll be time for them if one really you're passionate about in the final question and answer period. I'd really like you to raise it. I'm still looking for someone to strongly and vigorously object to something I've said. I'll give this book to someone who does that. How's that? Okay? I will. But anyways, I'm flat out of time. I'm sorry we couldn't go through those questions. Yeah.